Hello, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new, my name is Shelly, and this channel is really all about books and literature, and we just have the best time. I can be very excited, and yeah, I speak with my hands a lot. I might even start yelling depending on what we're speaking about, but it's all vibes here. And as always, keep it friendly in the comments. I'm not afraid to block and delete. But today, what I wanted to speak about was the books that have really changed my life. And when I titled this video, I was just like, that is such what does that mean? But when I say that, I mean the books that have had an impact on me, how I see the world, how I see people, and even haven't had an impact on what I read now, and where I am now in life. And to be fair, I was just like, oh my goodness, I can choose this, that, and the third. I can choose so many books that I really feel there was a place in my life where I'm just like, wow, I'll never forget this book. And so I'll say now that this list could probably be a bit longer, but I am just trying to keep it as concise as possible and really just give you guys the books that came to me first. Because if you came to me first, I'm just like, okay, it was you. And so I'm just going to go down the list of, the books in order of when I read them in terms of like my life, the point in my life. And I'll just give you an explanation as to why the books, why they mean so much to me in terms of like me stating that these books changed my life and had an impact on my life. So we're going to start first and foremost with The Giver. Now, I feel like a lot of us might recognize The Giver because there was a film. I never watched the movie, so I don't know. But some of us might have actually had to read it for school because that is when I read it. Because when I read it, I was not a reader. I was not interested in reading. It was a book that we had to read for English class. And I remember reading this book and the fact that it made me think so deeply about the world around us and how society works and how society has an impact on what you do. And I would just sat there and I thought, whoa. I will definitely say that it made me question the things around me more. I was always an inquisitive child. I definitely would be analyzing everything around me anyway. But I think what I loved about this book is that it gave me these reassurances that it's okay to be as analytical. It's okay to not think in the same way that other people think, because there would be a lot of those moments. And I think it would even stem from those little interests that you had. So I think I read it in year 8, I believe. So from like back in those days, like I've always been an anime lover. But for those fellow anime lovers who are like me, you guys remember when anime wasn't cool? When you would get teased. You still watch anime because anime was something that we were meant to leave behind in primary school. And so it would be something that, you hide, or like even the interest, like I loved researching things. I was a bit of a nerd I was a nerd way back when, like a geek as well. I love researching things and learning things. But I think obviously in that time of your life, you're really kind of just trying to keep a low profile or fit in as much as possible. If you have a high profile, let it be a good one. And I think reading that book definitely gave me those reassurances that, you know what, thinking differently from everyone else is a vibe, because you know what, you never actually know the impact that you will have in the future, and the wider impact that you can have on those people who don't think the same way that you do. And I was just like, it gave me those reassurances, but it also made me think about what we're being led to believe, that you are really being led to just be a duck in a line, to just kind of follow the status quo and follow what you're told. But for me, it was a case of, don't always, question everything. Keep questioning everything in my case, and you never know where that'll take you. And so being like such a young child and like I love that they made us read that book, and I really hope that they're still making young kids read that book, because I think it definitely gives you a mindset that is so integral to surviving this world and like making your mark on this world, but also making a good mark on this world. Because obviously if you read the book, you know that, there were a few things that were hidden for the good of the world, but then making your own decision about what's good and what's not just what people tell you is what's good and what's not from your own observations and what you believe and what you know to be true. That's very, very important. And so, yeah, I really do hope they're still making people read that in like literature classes and English classes. And if not, go and find it for yourself and make your kids read it. But yeah, that was like the very first book that I would say like definitely like boom kind of hit me and changed my life and had an impact on me and like I said, how I think, who I am. And I'm really, really happy that it did that. What's so interesting is, and I've done this for a lot, but I have a goal, is that the book is actually in a series, like in a 4-book series, I believe, and I never finished the series because remember, it was a book from school. And in our I'm from the Caribbean and our island is really, really small. Like, the library was really small. My parents never took me. Like I said, I didn't start reading until later on in life. And so even though that book like had an impact on me, I never went further to finish the series. I didn't even know it was a series at that point in time. But I remember when I started reading again, and one of the first books I bought, when I was like, collecting the books that I'm just like, I want in my library, even if it's a reread or I've read it already, was The Giver. And when I was buying it, that's when I realized this book is part of a series. And so it is one of my goals to reread and finish the actual series. And I'm excited to do that. Now, the next book, now this book, I think, why this book had such an impact on me is because it showed me tragedy at a young age once more. And it's not like I was young, like it's not like I was 12 or anything, but I was still like, I wasn't an adult. I think I was maybe like 15 or so when I read it, and that is The Kite Runner. This book also was made into a film, and I remember I tried to watch the movie. I think I made it like 2 minutes in, and then I was just like, yeah, I'm not gonna make it through. And I just gave up. But this, I think why this book had such an impact on me is from a young, from a young age. I think, even if you saw your parents watching the news or, you were told what was going on around the world, you still lived in your own little bubble. And so when I would hear about wars or stuff like that in passing, like it didn't really dawn on me what that meant. And I definitely didn't know what the people in those war zones were really going through. Like maybe we would be taught in social geography, oh, there was a genocide and people have had to become refugees, and you don't know what that means as like a teenager. You don't actually understand what other people are going through, especially when your entire life, your country or wherever you live has never experienced war, has never experienced, a battle or crisis of that length. And that's really, really funny because I'm just like, my parents hail from Haiti. I'm from Haitian descent, and like, Haiti, as we know, have gone through the rucker for time. And I'm just like, my parents have definitely gone through worse times than me, but my parents have obviously, they're just like giving you a better life than what we had. And so I had these blinders on. And a lot of us have these blinders on because when it comes to what other people are experiencing, we're still in our own little bubble, especially at that age. You're a teenager, you're going through puberty, peer pressure, all that other stuff. You're finding your own personality and whatnot. And so it's really just what's going on around you. And even if you're watching a movie and you're watching a movie that has a war zone or a show that that's in a war zone, again, it's a show, it's a movie. And I think reading The Kite Runner and because obviously it was a first, not it, it's a fiction book, but that's people's realities. Even though it's fiction, it's representing the reality of someone, and it was so raw and they held nothing back. And at one point I was just like, how do you have this in a school? Are we, should you have this, given to us? But it was so important for me to actually see the realities that some people are facing, the people in war, the trauma that people go through, how people react to the trauma they go through, because there are different reactions to the, there were a lot of traumas in that book, but there were different reactions from different characters, in the traumas that they experience, and the the emotions that you go through, the sorrow, the pain. It was so much, the grief. It's not just the grief of people dying, but the grief of experiences of a childhood, of a life. Like, there was so much, and I think it changed me because from that point on, I was more aware of the fact that outside of my bubble, like so much was going on. We've been told this so many times, and I'm sure you guys, when you were not eating or you were refusing to eat or you were being picky, your parents might have been like, there are starving children here and there. But then you read The Kite Runner, and there are so much worse pains than starvation, and that is a pain in itself. And then you go through that pain, and then you go through other pains through their like recounting of what they went through. Obviously, like I said, it's a fiction book, but it's people's realities. And so I think it was the first time that I was truly coming to grips with how unfair the world is, the pain that people go through, the traumas that people go through, and really how blessed I am. How blessed I was, obviously, back then, but yeah, how blessed I am and was, living the life that I lived and live now. And it was so raw, and it was so hurtful. I was just like, mm-mm. Because I read that book, and my friends were just like, oh yeah, I'm reading another book by him, by the author Khalid Hosseini, and they're just like, yeah, he just knows how to break your heart. And because I think they were reading A Thousand Splendid Suns, and after I read The Kite Runner, I'm just like, this is definitely like a book that will never leave me. And I love how the story was told in this book, especially the end. The end, it wasn't like a wrapped up bow, and apparently he's known for that, not giving like this like cute ending, but giving a realistic ending of, this is an open story, life goes on beyond this point. That's another thing that I was just like, that's so true. Like books that wrap up perfectly, like that's not how it goes. And even at that point, I hadn't read that many books, but then, because like I said, I didn't read back then, but then it was just hitting me with so many truths and so many realities. But I remember at that point, I said, I'm not reading another book by this man. This man's just going to hurt me, and I can't handle it. I think now that I'm more mature and I've read enough, but also the way I now see the world, and obviously I've been more exposed to everything that's going on in the world, and I've had more experiences, especially regarding like trauma and pain. I'm just like, I can probably go through it, but I don't know if I would willingly choose to go through it, genuinely. But it was definitely a book that had such an important impact in my, like, it had an important role in how I changed, how I was growing, and I really appreciate that. But when I tell you pain is real. The pain is real. But it was like, I think it's such an important book for people to read, especially if you're living in your bubble. Um, Not to say that that's everyone's experience, but that is someone's experience, and it was so hurtful to see. But yeah, definitely a book that changed my life, because it changed um, me living my little bubble, and I am very appreciative of that. I was still hurt though. Now the next book, the story behind this book, there was a funny story that goes with this book. So the next book is Someone Knows My Name, but the book also has another name, an alternative name, The Book of Negroes. Now, this is so funny. So what happened was, I saw the book, and the premise sounded interesting, because at that point, like I said, I like learning, and so historical fiction definitely grabbed me. And before I picked up that book, there was a classmate. She was reading The Book of Negroes. And then we were having lunch with our other classmates, and she was telling us, oh yeah, and this happened and that happened. And it definitely sounded interesting. I was just like, oh yeah, maybe one day I'll read it. And then obviously a few weeks go by, and I am reading Someone Knows My Name. And then I'm going through it, and this book is intense, by the way, but I'm going through it. And then I'm just like, this sounds so familiar. Even the names. I'm like, this name is literally what she told us. I actually went to her, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, I think the book that I'm reading is connected to the book that you're reading. Because, like, they have the same characters, and, like, the plot sounds so similar to what you're doing. So I think maybe it's from a different perspective or something. And then when I finished reading the book, and this is something that I do a lot, like when I finish reading something and I'm like so invested, even if it's a fiction book, I'm like, where did the inspiration come from? Like, is this based on a real story? Like, what, like, because I was really curious. I'm just like, is the Book of Negroes a real thing? I'll explain to you guys a bit later. And then that's when I go online and I research, and I realize that this is the same book that she was reading. I told her this later, obviously, but then basically the book's original name was The Book of Negroes. But there were some countries that were just like, the publishing houses were like, this is offensive. And yeah, we can't publish it like that. It might not be put anywhere, so we need an alternate name for it. And so it was given the alternate name of Someone Knows My Name. And so in some countries you'll find the Book of Negroes, and in others you'll find Someone Knows My Name. Now if there are countries that have no qualms, you might find bills depending on publishers and whatnot. But I like, it was so funny when that happened. I was just like, that's cool. I didn't really know that, books can do that. So now I'm always wondering if there are books out there that have multiple names, and what stories can be told from there. But this book, now I think this is around the time when I think I read it after The Kite Runner. I believe I did. But like I said, I liked learning and liked learning history. And around that age, I was also like becoming more aware of my ancestors, in terms of like, I'm black, and in the Caribbean, slavery. Basically, I was coming to terms with I was getting to know more about the fact that black people, if you're black, chances are, if you're black in the Caribbean anyway, and in America, chances are your ancestors were slaves. And obviously, because as kids, you learn a bit of your ancestors in terms of like the island that we're from. So we learned about the indigenous people of the land and such, but they didn't touch too much on slavery. But around that time, I was learning more and more. Like, it was coming up more on different stories, different shows. Like, it was being mentioned more and more. And so, like, at that point, I was curious, wanted to learn a bit more. So I did do my research, and Kunta Kinte, they scarred us with that series and whatnot. But when I saw the synopsis for this book, I said, okay, this might be an interesting read. I wasn't even sure if it was fiction at that point. I'm just like, this sounds very real. Like, it sounded like a biography or a retelling of something that really happened. And with this one, so it's basically obviously a fiction story about a young girl who's from a town in Africa, and obviously her village gets invaded by the slavers. They get taken as slaves. Her parents die, so she gets taken as slaves. As a slave, and the journey that they make, to collect slaves from other villages, and then the passage, and just her story. And it tells her story of how her parents were from different tribes, so she knew different languages. And when she was on the passage, like, she was able to understand multiple people, and she also had a very valuable skill of birthing kids. Like, she's basically a midwife, but she was really, really young. And so obviously for pregnant people, they could always depend on her. So she was a very valuable slave, basically. So it really recounts her life of like being a slave, going to freedom, getting married, having her baby taken away, like a lot of the story that a lot of slaves have gone through. So why I say this one definitely changed my life is because, like I said, this is around the time where I'm becoming more interested in what the reality of slavery was, because like I said, they didn't at that point didn't learn too much about it yet. And even in my school's particular curriculum, they didn't really address it. And it was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking. And then I think why it definitely changed my life is because to know that I have ancestors who went through this, and who knows if I have family scattered about because they were separated from my ancestor who would have been their mom. And you have to remember, like, the realities of what slaves went through a lot of times are not depicted in fictional works because they were so brutal. Because even after reading that book, and then like I said, when a book interests me, I go and I research, and then actually reading true realities in like the depth of actual abuse that the slaves would go through, it was nowhere near what was described in that book. And obviously the book was fiction, but like I said, they're not properly described in fiction, or even sometimes in nonfiction, because it's just so brutal, and they're just like, we can't put that on here. And there were so many emotions that this book took me through. Obviously, like I said, realizing that my ancestors at one point would have gone through this, and realizing what this means for what my history is, and even just like, once again, the fact that the truth that I found later on, and looking into like the erasure of history, the fact that some people didn't acknowledge history. And we would have, like, obviously back in the day, I definitely think that shows address racism way better because they did it in a better way. They just did. The way that they didn't try to hide the issue, or they weren't overdoing the issue. They spoke about it in real terms. They spoke about it in real lives. Like, they addressed it better back in the day. And so I think around that time, because remember, I'm from the Caribbean, so I'm living on an island. Like, it's black people. Like, yes, we have white people there, but the island is black. It's black people. It's very normal for people to look like me. It's not strange. If anything, I remember being a kid and we were always kind of just like so fascinated with white people because we're just like, oh, that's so cool. We don't see it very often. Like, it was cool. And I know that sounds a bit weird, but it's an island. Like, you guys are not the majority for the white people. And that's not even a bad thing, but you guys are not. And so something like racism was not something that I would have come into contact with. I would have heard of, I would have understood, I would have seen on TV or even read in books, but it's not something that I would have faced. I would have, like, there are other forms of discrimination, of course, I would have faced. That's 100% true, but I wouldn't have faced racism. And so, reading that book, everything just popped in the forefront. Like, just everything that came from this horrendous act of just honestly just disregarding a whole race of humanity and what impact that has had through the generations. Reading that book kind of like brought it all to the forefront. And so I had more of an understanding of what it meant for me to be black. And that sounds weird, but I did, in terms of like, I had an understanding of my ancestors and what they did, why, I have the rights that I have, because the fact that I'm in the Caribbean means that a few centuries ago, maybe even a few decades ago, I would have had these rights. And it's wild. So it definitely helped in terms of like not understanding, but coming to grips with what it means to be black in this day and age. Like, and that was, yeah, it was tough to say the least, but I appreciate that I got that, because yeah, from there I did research, and I did and have been doing more reading around race and everything that's involved with race. And so it was just an opening for me to educate myself more and more. And I think that I will never forget. So definitely changed my life 100%. Now, the next book takes a bit of a lighter, actually, no. I would say it takes a lighter note, but yeah, you can judge. Basically, the next book that changed my life was The Hunger Games. Now, this changed my life for several reasons and several areas of my life. So I say it changed my life in the sense of, obviously, I feel like everyone who read The Hunger Games and, read any dystopian books, I think for a lot of people, I think your mind goes in several directions, and we all think in different ways. So your mind might have gone somewhere different to where my mind was, but a lot of people, I know, our minds went into, it's a dystopian, but dystopian is a possible reality. I mean, it's a reality that goes with, a twisted, this will never happen reality, but it is always a possibility. And definitely my mind went there. But in terms of like why The Hunger Games truly, I think, changed my life, is I think that was the first book that I read, the first piece of fiction that I read, that made me just want to like chase after books. Because yes, I read The Kite Runner, I loved it. I read Someone Knows My Name, and I loved it. I read The Giver, and I loved it. But to me, like, because those were the books that, I was reading around that time, because even before, in earlier years, I had given like fiction books a chance for enjoyment. I read The Click. I don't know if you guys remember. If you guys remember The Click, I read Sweet Valley High, and I remember those were like my first instances of like books for fun. But I was just like, while it was fun to read at the time, at one point I just got bored. I'm just like, just clicks, and I was just like, yeah, I'm okay with it. But that was when I read The Hunger Games. It was the genre that grabbed at me, where I'm just like, I want more of this. Like, I want more, like the excitement of it all, but still like reflecting like how bad society can get and the deeper messages within it. I was just like, I want to gobble this up. And the reason I even read The Hunger Games was because the trailer had just come out for the first movie. And then so with the trailer coming out, some of the girls in class were reading The Hunger Games like to prepare for the movie, and some of them had already read it. And so I was just like, okay, I'll give it a shot, because the trailer looked thick. When Katniss was just like, I volunteer as tribute, the very, very iconic scene. Better in the book, by the way. Everything is. And then I read the book, and wow. I read it, and then I read the second book, obviously, and I think this was the moment where it was maybe written in stone that Shelley's going to be a reader. And I find it really funny because even after I read The Hunger Games, it was years before I genuinely properly started reading. But then The Hunger Games was, but to be fair, that was around like year 11, which is like fifth form, depending on which side of the world that you're on. Yeah, 11th grade, year 11, fifth form, whichever side of the world you're on. Those are the only ways I know how to translate where I was. So that's when I read it, because obviously that's when it came out, just about, I think. Well, that's when the movie came out. And keep in mind that I didn't like become like a full-fledged reader, but it ignited that like I want to engage more with literature. It ignited that passion, that desire within me. And yeah, because that was like towards the end of that year in high school, and I was just about to start sixth form, which, if you guys don't know, like that's 12th grade. Yeah, so much. But yeah, it ignited that passion within me, and that's when I started to try to find my literary identity. And that was such a fun time. It was genuinely such a fun time because it was a case of, and I don't know if I've spoken about this, but I definitely want to. But there is this like literary elitism that exists in the literature world. And they definitely infected my mind early on because I read The Hunger Games and I was just like, nah, reading is awesome. I want to be a reader. And I remember I took English for A levels, for sixth form, whatever you want to call it. And they gave us a reading assignment. And the book I read was The Secret History by Donna Tartt. That's the book I chose. She gave us a list of books that we could choose from. And I chose The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I would definitely say that was an interesting read, but I wouldn't put it on the list of books that impacted me, which is why it's not on this list. But yeah, it definitely did have a bit of an impact, but I think that impact started from The Hunger Games, where obviously I had to read it. I didn't have a choice, but the desire to actually read came like read for fun came from like The Hunger Games. Genuinely, I'm just like, nah, I want to do this. But then I entered A levels with this twisted, sick mindset of, to be a reader, I have to have read all of the classic books, And so that is where the chaos journey of my reading journey started. And I think that's probably why it took me so long to actually get into reading, because it was all over the place. It was all over the place. But yeah, so around that point in sixth form, my mindset was I have to read all of the classic books to be a reader, And so that's when it started. I started reading Shakespeare, guys. That's when I first read The Scarlet Letter. Like I was dug in. But then one of the first books I read in my journey to being obsessed with, classic literature, to be an official reader, was the next book on the list of books that have changed my life, and that is Pride and Prejudice. Oh gosh. I find this so funny because if you know me, you know that my favorite genres are fantasy, thrillers, definitely YA dystopian. Romance usually comes at the bottom of the list. It doesn't mean that I won't read romance. If it's a good romance, I'll read it. But romance is usually the bottom of the list. So to have one of my all-time favorite books ever, one of the books that changed my life, be a romance book, one of the romance books actually, I always find very, very funny. But Pride and Prejudice, I think it changed everything for me. Because at that point, I'm now going, yeah, the classic books are where it's at. Because Pride and Prejudice was actually, I believe, the first book that I read in my, I have to read the classic books, to be a reader. I read Pride and Prejudice and I fell in love immediately. When I say fell in love, I fell in love. I fell in love with Lizzie. I thought, I was just like, oh my goodness, Jane Austen's writing style is amazing. I love how she addressed so many issues, but she was still telling a story. And the plot, the way that the plot moved, I thought was utter perfection. And I was just like, how do you tell such a beautiful, perfect story? And like, I was just like, and I wanted more. I'm just like, is there a sequel? But there wasn't. And so like, I was just like, okay, what's the next book I'm going to read from her? And then I read Emma, and I'm just like, I enjoyed Emma, but not as much as Pride and Prejudice. But then you don't understand the obsession that fell on me after reading Pride and Prejudice. I found out that there was a movie, and I watched that movie, and I abused it. I rewatched and rewatched and rewatched. That was a Keira Knightley one. And then I found out that there was a longer series that would have gotten to more details, the Colin Firth Pride and Prejudice, and I watched that. The obsession that fell on me from reading Pride and Prejudice I won't even lie. At one point, I was just like, this is absolutely unhealthy. But it's very, very warranted. If you've read Pride and Prejudice, you just know that that book is utter perfection. Loved it so much. And so why has it changed my life? Is because I was just like, at this point, I was just like, yeah, read. I'm definitely gonna read. I very already love reading. And then, but at this point, I said, I'm gonna read all the classics because they're all awesome. And then obviously, I learned that that was not the case because I read Emma. I still enjoyed it. I did enjoy it. I do really like that book. It wasn't my favorite. I was just like, it's okay. And then I read Shakespeare. Shakespeare is all about the drama. Shakespeare is when I started to doubt myself at that point because the language, like Pride and Prejudice, the language was, somehow in some places, but I caught on fairly well. Shakespeare, I was fighting for my life. I was fighting for my life, and at that point, I said maybe classics aren't for me. And then I took a break, but I did enjoy it. I read Othello, and I really enjoyed it. Like honestly, the drama. And then I read The Scarlet Letter. Guys, I think I've made a short about classic books and what I feel about them, whether they're worth your time or not. To me, Scarlet Letter was so not worth your time. I was just like, bruh, this book. I'm so sorry. I was just like, yo, like I get the message, but I was just like, this writing is. I feel like the writing was kind of lazy. But anyway, so I know a lot of people will like debate that, but I felt like the writing was a bit lazy. That being said, like Pride and Prejudice, it really kind of like it doubled down on that passion that the Hunger Games really started, and then it started like a semi passion for like the classics that died out really quickly because I was just like, some of these books are just Shakespeare is fighting me for my life, and then I'm just like, I'm going to take a pause. But at that point in time, I was in A levels, and life was beating all of us up anyway because we're trying to get into uni, and our classes were beating us up. It like the increase, the level increase from high school to A levels is not normal at all. Like they need to do better. Like that's not normal. It was horrendous. We were fighting for our lives, guys. But because I had to like focus on my actual like work and getting into uni, I couldn't actually read that much anyway, and so I wasn't too fussed about that. So my reading did take a pause at that point, but at that point it wasn't even a choice. It was a case of you need to focus on your schoolwork. But yeah, Pride and Prejudice set it in stone for me that yeah, I'm going to read. And from that point on, like, I finished A levels, I got to uni, and the first year of uni was more so me learning a new country, obviously a new city, because I went from the Caribbean all the way to the UK. And so it was learning culture, learning where to go. Like, it was just me settling into uni. So the first year, I didn't really read. I didn't read at all, actually. And then towards the end of the year, I read a science fiction book, The Atlantis Plague. And I was shook. At that point, I said, yeah, you need to be serious again. You need to get back into reading. You've had a year of doing nothing, but you need to get back. And so that's because remember, I have always been a nerd, and so Star Trek, Star Wars, like I've always been into like Battlestar Galactica. I have always been Firefly, all of those like shows I loved, and I love those worlds. Like it was always so entertaining to me. And so the science fiction of the Atlantis Plague was amazing because like it seemed like a simple story at first, and then they introduced like these science fiction elements, so you're just like, whoa. And once again, I went through this conflicting moment of which genre do I actually like to read. Now I'm mentioning this, but the Atlantis Plague is actually not one of the books that I put in the books that changed my life, because I'm just like, it didn't like, yes, it kept reinvigorating me to read, but once again, I don't feel like it's a pivotal point where I was just like, this is definitely like a point, because remember, I already want to read at this point, but it was definitely fun to read, I'll give you that. But the next book I will definitely say changed my life. And this book I read later on, but it was just so amazing, and that was Born a Crime. Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. And the funny thing is, so me and my best friend, she would come over all the time. We were in different unis, but she would come over all the time. And when we were alone, we would just watch everything. We'd watch Maury, Jerry Springer, and then she's just like, oh, I have to introduce you to Trevor Noah. He's one of my favorite comedians. And then we watched a few of his comedy shows, and I loved him. And then I found out he was writing, like, he had a book out. And so I'm just like, cause, okay, cool. I'm going to, cause I like him. I thought he was so eloquent, but so funny at the same time. Like, he was so articulate, and his jokes, I was just like, you can be so funny, but be so intelligent. And I love that. And I got Born a Crime. And at this point in time, I had not read Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela, but I had watched, films about, the apartheid in South Africa. And so I was very aware, or, somewhat aware of what, had gone on in South Africa and what they had went through. But then Trevor Noah lived it, and once again, at this point, I had not read Long Walk to Freedom. And the thing is, with Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom, it was to me, it's definitely different because he was the progenitor. Like, he was leading that walk, obviously with so many people behind him, but he was leading it. But then, what about someone living in it? What about a child born into it? And Trevor Noah gave us that perspective. And unlike The Kite Runner, which was a work of fiction, but could definitely be someone's reality, this is a real person, and this was his reality. And he was literally born a crime. This man was born as a mixed race baby when relations between the two different races was literally illegal. And I loved it because, once again, it educated me on something that I was aware of, but had not, like, being aware of it didn't give me an understanding of it. But then hearing the stories of someone who went through it helped that understanding. And when I read these books, like The Kite Runner and Born a Crime, I love the empathy that it continues to develop within me. Like, my parents, taught me sympathy, and I was raised in a way that obviously developed that empathy on its own. But hearing these stories more and more helped me to empathize with people who are in a situation that is different from mine. Like I said, The Kite Runner, took me out of my bubble. But Born a Crime, apartheid is a whole different situation, especially because apartheid only recently ended. People hear about SA and apartheid, and I think a lot of people think it's like slavery. It ended hundreds of years ago. But in the same way that slavery ended hundreds of years ago, and then there was segregation, and then in America there were Jim Crow laws, and now there is still racism. Something can end, but the effects still linger, and that's what we're seeing now. But then apartheid hasn't even had hundreds of years to simmer down. So the effects of apartheid are still nice and strong, real and strong, wrong and strong, And so, once again, it continues to develop that empathy within me, but also educate me to the experiences of people who were there. The understanding I got from it, but also what that book did for me is, yes, give me the understanding and develop more empathy within me. But at that point, after I read his book, because the writing is beautiful and it's so funny. And from that book, I was like, I want to read more people's experiences because everyone will have a different experience from me. And so from that point, I was just like, I want to read more memoirs and autobiographies. And I haven't read that many. But then I remember after I read Born a Crime, I read maybe 3 more. And they were celebrity memoirs. So I'm just like, that's okay. But it was even interesting reading celebrity memoirs and seeing what everyone went through. I was just like, oh, these celebrities who I actually love and I follow, they had such traumatic childhoods, even traumatic adulthoods. And it was like, that was such a slap to the face. But that's the thing, and this is why I felt like it was so, it's so important to me, because once again, it was just like nailing down that point that people have different lives, and the person you see in front of you, you don't know what is behind them. You don't even know what is still with them, and it's just so insane because you see Trevor Noah, and Trevor Noah is making jokes, and then you're just like, you had such a chaotic childhood. And one of the memoirs I read after his was Around the Way Girl by Taraji P. Henson. And you're just like, bruh, these people have gone through the ringer. And it's insane. It's really, really insane. But I was just like, I read that and I was just like, I appreciated more and more from that point the experiences of other people, especially told from their own point of view. And so yeah, definitely one of the books that have a lasting impact on me, and I love that I read it. It was meant to have a movie, but I've never seen that movie come to fruition, which is really sad because I really wanted that book to become a movie. I thought it would be so entertaining, but like I thought it would be such a great story as well because the storytelling of the book was great. Now, we only have a few more books, but it's going to be interesting how I tell it. So, the next books that had an impact on my life, like really changed my life, changed what my life is now. And that is, and I have the list out, so I don't want to forget or mess it up. So I'm just going to look at the list. Daughters of the Unri, Skin of the Sea, Beast of Prey, Son of the Storm, Blood Trials, and Blood Scion. Now, you're wondering what is this weird collection of books. Now, these books are all Black authored, and center West African mythology in the plot. And the reason these books changed my life is because as I am now, like a content creator, whenever I have to acknowledge it, I'm just that's weird because I don't see myself as a content creator. I'm just like I make content, and it's weird to see myself as a content creator. It might be imposter syndrome, but who knows? But basically, I had been on Instagram for a while, and my friend was just like, I think TikTok is more your type of people. And then I went on TikTok and I was making a few videos, and then one day I made a video about books inspired by West African mythology. And literally, I posted it, and in like an hour, it had like tens of thousands of views. And by the next day, it had hundreds, over 100,000 views, like hundreds of thousands of views in the week. And from there, I had tens of thousands of followers. And from there, I had publishers reaching out and collaborations and gifted books and gifted boxes. And from there, I would say my official like consistent content creation journey began because as the Instagram was like growing slowly, I had like one or two collaborations, but then TikTok, when that video blew and then my page blew, the opportunities just literally rushed through the door. So when I say it changed my life, I mean it literally changed my life because from TikTok, I came on YouTube and decided to be consistent. And here we are now. Like I've had so many opportunities because of TikTok that have come from TikTok and now come from YouTube. And it's always so, I always look back and I'm just like, I cannot believe it. I cannot believe it. It's such a blessing that came from one video. And the books that I suggested in the video, that I recommended in the video, were the books I just listed. Those books right there were the books I just listed. And so those books to me will always be the books that literally changed my life. Because those books, people saw those books and people resonated with the video. They loved the video. And people have now read the books and loved the books because, yeah, the books are great, let's be real. But yeah, so those books have changed my life, and I will forever be grateful. The stories in those books as well. Like if I had to go through each of those stories, each of the books, like we will be here longer than we should. So I'm not going to, but the books themselves, because I read those books, and I'm just like, you need to read those books. And so that's where the video came from. And so those books were definitely impactful in more ways than one. Now we're almost done. We only have 3 more technically. The next books is 2 books this time, and that is The Chronicles of Narnia and This Present Darkness by Frank Peretti. So The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis, This Present Darkness by Frank Peretti. The reason these have changed my life is I've mentioned this on this channel several times before, but I write. I like to write. I've published nothing, but that's okay. But I like to write, and my writing is like, it's been up and down over the years. Like I've been writing for years, and then I think it's been a few years ago where my love of writing just kind of reignited itself. It just came out of nowhere. I don't know why. I was just like, oh, I want to, reshift this story, and then I like wrote an entire like book in like months because I like stayed up all night because it was just flowing out of my brain. I was just like, oh my goodness, da 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 da, and that was so fun. And from there, I've been like consistently writing. So I've been consistently writing for years again. And the reason these 2 books have changed my life is because, so if you don't know, I said it on this channel several times all over, I'm a devout Christian. And I think if you're Christian, you know that a lot of the Christian books are very cringy. Christian books, Christian media, very cringy, very you're just like, oh, that's so cheesy. And you're just like, even as a Christian, I can't defend you. Like, you're hella cheesy. I wouldn't recommend a few of you. Yeah, obviously we have our good ones, but then there are so many cheesy ones and cringy ones that you're just like, yeah. And then as a writer, especially in a lot of the books that I'm writing that are, more faith centered, even though from their fantasy books, it's a case of, how how would you represent your faith, in a way that's not cringy, like some of the things that you've been seeing. And then you see Narnia, this beautiful Christian allegory, and then you see This Present Darkness, which is like literally fantasy in this real world. So urban fantasy, but it's kind of just like, yeah. And then they're so amazing, like so fantastic, like life changing for a lot of people. And then you see that Christian fiction doesn't have to be cheesy, doesn't have to be corny, doesn't have to be cringe. And you will have this beautiful audience, and you will still be able to share the gospel with an audience who loves it, while still giving like this amazing, like fantastical story with amazing fantastical narratives. And so those books changed my life in the sense that I think giving me hope, or letting me see that it's possible to write a fantasy book that appeals to everyone, but still representing my faith through the books. And that definitely, it gave me hope, and it made me happy, especially with the books that I'm writing that have like supernatural elements and inspired by my faith. And so it's just like those books are definitely beautiful. And that brings me to the last book that has changed my life, and the most important book that has the most important change in my life, and that is the Holy Bible. I mean, I've just mentioned it. I'm a Christian, and the Bible, the Word of God, is what changes your heart, because it reveals God to you. And reading it for myself, because you can be told to be a Christian, but you're not going to want to do it, so you can't be forced to do it. But then reading it for myself with an open heart, and seeing how my life has changed since taking in the Word of God and proclaiming Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, I'm just like, yeah, biggest change, best change of my life, with no regrets. And it's been amazing ever since. Like, even though it's the last book on this list, definitely came before a lot of the other books that I've read, a lot of the other changes that have been made. But I was just like, if we're going to end this video, let's end it well, let's end it strong. And it's just really, really been a beautiful journey, with the Word of God, with God. And genuinely, I think, yeah, of all the books on this list, if all of them were to disappear and the Bible remained, it would be a vibe. It'd be a vibe still, and my life would still be amazing. It'd be great. It'd be beyond words, which is what it is now, and I'm really, really happy for that. So yeah, those are the books that have changed my life. Like I said, there's probably like one or two other books out there that I'm just like, you definitely had an impact. But for now, like, those are the books that I'm just like, you know what, definitely let's speak on this impact, this change, the ones that I look back on, smile, think on, and reflect on, and I'm so grateful for. And I am really happy. So thanks so much for hearing me out. Let me know, have you read any of the books that I've mentioned? What are your thoughts? And maybe even let me know some books that have changed your life, have had an impact on your life, and why. But that's it for today, guys. I will see you guys next time. And yeah, I hope you are all enjoying the new year. I don't think I've said it yet. So yeah, as we are ending, happy new year. And I hope 2025 is a great year for every single one of you. I'll see you guys soon. Bye.